Dean of the College of Business. I'd like to welcome you to the 4th Annual Richard Vanquish Endowed Lecture Series. The University and the College of Business views itself as thought leaders in the issues facing the state. That is why we've gathered this esteemed panel tonight to talk about one of the major issues facing the state, and that is the public pension crisis. Before we begin tonight's panel discussion, I thought I'd give you a brief history of the Richard Vanquish lecture. The lecture was named after Richard Vanquish, who spent all but 4 of his 38 years of his academic career as an accounting professor at URI. When he retired in 2004, the College of Business had a wonderful send-off for him, and with the help of his former friends and students, he created the first faculty professorship in the history of the College of Business, the Vanquish Professorship in Accounting. His resume when he retired was over 38 pages long. He is a prolific scholar and an internationally known accounting historian. As a testament to his scholarly contributions, the accounting historians have named their annual Outstanding Research Paper Award the Vanquish Award. Richard has his undergraduate degree from Bryant University, his master's from URI, and his PhD from the University of Florida. I'd like to welcome Richard. And as I indicated, it was through the generous contributions of his friends and the students that we have this endowed lecture series. The person who created this lecture series is Deborah Ciolfi, a 1980 graduate of URI's College of Business Administration. She's currently in charge of business development for Providence Investment Management, which is a privately held investment management firm. Prior to that, she was the founder and CEO of Providence Investors, also a privately held business advisory and asset management firm. She established the Vanquish lecture because Dr. Vanquish was always an inspiration to her. His classes were especially memorable because he had a rare talent of combining accounting theory with humor and laughter. No small feat. For his former students, they might remember him as Super CPA. Deborah said, "I wanted to create a lecture series that would enable the business school to attract some bright, talented people who might also inspire the students at URI." Well, tonight, we have 4 very talented individuals. Deborah? Now to the panel. Our first panelist, Ernie Amante, is a CPA and a partner with DiSanto Priest & Company with over 30 years' experience in the accounting profession. Prior to his current position, he was the Auditor General for the state of Rhode Island from 1994 to 2010. He is the past president of the National State Auditors Association, the Rhode Island Society of CPAs, and chairman of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. Past chairman, I should say. Accounting Today has twice named Mr. Almonte as one of the top 100 most influential people in the accounting profession. He is the recipient of the Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council Robert M. Goodrich Distinguished Public Award. He also holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Administration and a Master's in Taxation from Bryant University. In 2009, he received an honorary doctorate of business administration, also from Bryant University. Mr. Almonte is a graduate of the Seniors Executive in State and Local Government Innovations and Governance at Harvard University JFK School of Government. Ernie Amante. Alan Fung is the mayor of Cranston, the 3rd largest city in Rhode Island. Elected in 2008, Mr. Fung made Rhode Island history by becoming the first Asian American mayor in the state. From 2003 to 2007, Mayor Fung was a citywide councilman. Since taking office in January 2009, he has boosted economic development by bringing in over 400 new jobs to Cranston. He was the first mayor in the state to successfully negotiate pension reform with a major union by replacing the costly defined benefits pension system with a defined contribution plan. Before becoming mayor, Allen served from 2009 to 2009 as Government Relations Counsel for MetLife, as a prosecutor in the Rhode Island Department of the Attorney General's Office, and as a litigation associate with Mandel, Schwartz, and Beauclair. Mayor Fung graduated from Rhode Island College and Suffolk University Law School and has also completed the Leadership Rhode Island program. Mayor Fung. Treasurer Raimondo grew up in Smithfield, Rhode Island, and attended LaSalle Academy, where she graduated first in her class. She attended Harvard University, where she was recognized as the top economics student and was awarded a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford University. After Oxford, she attended Yale Law School, graduating in 1998. After law school, she worked in New York as a clerk for Federal District Court Judge Kimball Wood before beginning her career in the venture capital business. She returned to Rhode Island over 10 years ago and co-founded the investment business Point Judith Capital. At Point Judith, she helped build companies as diverse as Nabsys, a company that specializes in DNA sequencing, and Narragansett Brewery, both located in Rhode Island. She served as vice chair of the board of Crossroads Rhode Island and is an active member on the board of Women and Infants Hospital of Rhode Island. She has served on the boards of Family Service Rhode Island, the Business Innovation Factory, and LaSalle Academy. Treasurer Raimondo. Our moderator for tonight's event is Gary Sasse, who has been a fixture in Rhode Island public policy arena for almost 35 years. While serving as the Assistant Chief Administrative Officer and Deputy Director of Finance and Administration for the City of Memphis, he was recruited in 1977 to become the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council. After leading RIPEC for over 30 years, in 2008, he was appointed the state's first director of the Department of Revenue and also led the governor's tax policy group. The following year, Governor Carcieri asked Mr. Sasse to also assume the responsibilities of the director of the Rhode Island Department of Administration. He held both of these positions until February 2010. Currently, he's the director of Bryant University's Institute of Public Leadership and is also a distinguished visiting professor of public policy at Rhode Island College and teaches at Northeastern University. He is the co-author of the recently released Corrective Action Plan to restore sound financial management to the City of Providence. Gary holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Florida State University, a master's degree in public administration from the University of Missouri, and an honorary doctorate from Brown University. I'll turn the program over to Gary Sasse.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yes, good. Before we start, I'd just like to mention a few ground rules. There will be times for questioning when we're finished, and we'd like to keep the conversation as moving and as lively as possible. A couple of things about public pensions before we start. I think it's important to note that we're really not talking about one pension system. And sometimes we say we paint everything with one brush. There are really three pension systems. There's the pension system of state employees and public school teachers. There's the pension system for municipal workers that's administered through the state. And then there are various city and town local pension systems. And they're all different and have different issues. Just to set the background historically, in the 1970s and 80s, particularly in regard to teachers and state employees, there were significant increases in benefits. But since 1992, between 1992 and 2004, there were no major changes in pension provisions for public employees in the state system and for school teachers. Since 2005, there have been reductions in pension benefits. And I was just trying to run some figures to put it in perspective and put a face on it. But prior to the reforms, if a teacher or a state worker had retired with an income of $56,000 and 30 years of service, before the reforms, their pension would have been about $36,000, $37,000. After the reforms, it's about $30,000. So there has been, over the last 4 or 5 years, significant changes in public pensions. But even with these changes, and I think the reason that we're here for this discussion tonight, costs continue to rise and the funded situation continues to deteriorate. And given the state's fiscal problems, coupled with asset losses, coupled with demographic factors, it's been suggested, not only in Rhode Island, but in many states of this country, that there's a need to re-examine the public pension system in order to accomplish the objectives of having it affordable for taxpayers, but also having it sustainable for people who have worked hard and are entitled to the pensions, and make sure something is there, because the financial glide path seems to be very problematic. So with that, let me ask Ernie Amante to kind of talk about how we've gotten here and kind of give an overview of where we are today.
Thank you, Gary, and welcome everyone. F. Scott Fitzgerald said, grab your chair, pull it up to the edge of the precipice, because I'm about to tell you a story. And there's no more appropriate beginning to my presentation to tell you about how we got to where we are today. And the thing that I want to tell you, that what I'm about to tell you doesn't feel good, tastes good, and it absolutely doesn't smell good. I was the Auditor General for 15 years, and 10 out of the last 15 years as the Auditor General, we would have conversations with elected officials, bureaucrats, citizens to try to talk about this problem. And we said that if it didn't get fixed, it would take draconian measures to fix it. Well, 10 years have gone by. We're pretty much at that point now where I think we're getting closer and closer to those draconian measures to solve the problem. And we always really believe that, and I always believe as the Auditor General with our reports, to make sure we put them up on the website and to have forums like this to talk about this. It was my theory all the time to put light on the subject. Light would create heat, and heat would cause action. And that's what you see in a forum like this in the reports. We're putting light on the subject to make you aware of it. Obviously, what you do with this information will put heat on people, and heat causes action. Hopefully it'll be positive action to solve the problem. Because one of the things I've always been deeply concerned about is that when people get to their 70s and 80s and they're relying upon a pension and they don't have the will or the desire to fight, what are they going to do when the check isn't the same amount that they thought they were going to get when they retired, or there's just no check at all? So it's that important. The problem we have is absolutely not sustainable, and I wanted to talk to you about that today. And it really is appropriate that we're doing it at the University of Rhode Island, because if we don't solve this, it will be the next generation, those students graduating from here, that'll have to pay the bill. So it is appropriate that we do it right here. So let's take a look at this from a high level. And when I talk about pension plans and the unfunded liabilities, I always talk about the other post-retirement benefits like medical, that people get health care for life, because they're pretty much linked together and they're both unfunded. So let me sort of put these numbers in perspective for you. I'll tell you the statewide number, then I'll put it in a different format. The first one, if you look at the state pension shortfall, how much is underfunded? And when I talk about underfunded, we're talking about an actuary says if you have X amount of dollars here today, this is how much you need invested at a certain rate in order to pay everyone that's retired. Similar to you putting your money in an IRA, you're putting money in, assuming you're going to make a certain rate of return on your money, so you can draw it out as you're retired so that you could last through your retirement collecting the money. That's what we're talking about. And so when the actuary determines for the state, and then I'll talk about cities and towns, they're saying you need this pool of money today invested at a certain rate, and then when you're paying everyone their retirement checks, the money will be there if it's fully funded. and getting the rate of return that they told you you'd get. So let's talk about the state on the high level, and I know the treasurer will talk about specifics on this, but I'm going to talk about this from the 30,000-foot level. We have the state pension underfunded by approximately $7 billion. And we can talk about whether that's the number or if it's even higher, but let's say it's $7 billion. What I always try to put in perspective for all of you, if you think about the state of Rhode Island has 1 million people, from the most elderly person in the state of Rhode Island to the newborn baby that was just born this morning. It's approximately 1 million. You take $7 billion divided by 1 million people, that means that a new baby that was born this morning, just in the state pension plan, owes $7,000. So when you think about that, every single person owes $7,000, your share of that deficit. But it gets worse than that, because that's just a state pension shortfall. There's a municipal pension shortfall, and that's about $1.9 million. $1.9 billion divided by 1 million people, $1,900. There's a municipal, they call it OPEB. That's the health care for the rest of your life. And unfortunately, many cities and towns, including the state, when you look at pensions, there's some money put aside in order to pay this bill. When you look at OPEB, those post-retirement benefits, for the most part, a lot of the cities and towns and the state have zero set aside, zero. So it's completely unfunded. So to say underfunded is a misnomer, because it's unfunded. So the municipal OPEB shortfall, if you look at the Auditor General's report that came out in 2010, that number was $2.4 billion. But the numbers, I know for a fact, is too low, because I know Gary did it, and we had a panel looking at the City of Providence numbers. The numbers that they used for their shortfall on health care was $600 million, but they used the incorrect figure. The number really is a little over $1.4 billion. They were saying 600 million, it's 1.4 billion. So you look at that, and it's approximately $3.3 billion in total, divided by 1 million people, $3,300. And then you have the state OPEB, that health care for life, that's short $780 million, or another $780. So think about this for a second. You add up those numbers, 7,000, 1,900, 3,300, and $780 per person. It comes to roughly $13,000. So I guess my question would be to all of you, when you go to the bank to get a car loan or a mortgage, how many of you are putting on the liability section of your personal financial statement that you owe $13,000 to the state? I'd imagine there's nobody here doing that, but you actually do owe $13,000. Now you look at my family, it's my wife and I, and I have 5 sons. Well, multiply that out, and so for my family, we owe $91,000. $91,000 for my family for just these 2 things, unfunded pension and the health care for life. Now think about that. If that was a credit card that you owed and you wanted to walk away from that debt, you're going to ruin your credit, and you'd have some problems with doing it, but eventually you probably could get out by filing bankruptcy or doing some other thing to get rid of that number. But imagine my family. Imagine your family. You don't want to pay the $13,000? You just get in your car and you drive to another state, and you move to another state, and your liability just went away. It's that easy to get rid of this debt if you don't want to fix the problem. I love this state, and it's a great quality of life. We need to address the problem, fix the problem. And that's what we need to do, because it is too easy to walk away and drive away. And when you look at it, if you're graduating from this institution or any other one, and you're thinking about what you should do for your career, we're going to lose some very talented people that don't want to pay this debt. They'll just go to another state to get their job. So that's going to hurt us in the long term. So it's a problem that needs to be addressed. So when I testify about this, I always tell people, if this is what we're going to do, and we're just going to keep passing or kicking the can down the road, as a lot of people refer to it, I tell them that what we should do is we should stop sending our children and grandchildren birthday cards and Christmas cards with money in it. What we really should do is send them invoices, because that's really what we're doing, is we're passing on our debt to them. Let's just be honest with them and tell them, and they should know that. Now, how does this all happen? Well, if you think about it from a political point of view, a really good financial decision and a really good political decision a lot of times butt heads. if all of you listen to what I said today and you say, well, this side over here wants to run for office, and they listen to me and say, you know, I agree with Ernie saying this problem needs to be solved. So instead of spending $7 billion a year, we're only going to spend $6 billion, and $1 billion of it, we'll put it away into this pension plan and the health care and try to solve that problem. But this side hears the same message that I hear, that I said, the same message they heard, and they say, well, you know what? I'm going to spend the whole $7 billion. I'm not going to touch the pension. But you know the new playground that you want? I'll build it. And you know the new soccer field up there that you want? We'll build that too. You want something? We'll pave your roads. We'll do whatever you want. So we as citizens, we say that we want it fixed, but we want it fixed with no harm to us. And we don't want anything to change. And that's the thing, is a lot of people want progress without change. And it's impossible to do that. You need change for progress. Let's go back to the numbers again. And if you forget any of the numbers I told you, don't worry about it. If all you remember is that they're all big and they're all bad, you'll understand the whole concept of what I'm talking about. Let's look at, there's the annual required contribution that
it would be 57% of their tax levy. 57%. Pawtucket 59%, Johnston 47%. They're just 3 examples. Let's use Pawtucket as an example. 59%. Imagine this. The very first day of every year, when you open up the door, you got to stick the key in the door to open up the city for the year. 59% of your levy is going for costs from the past. Nothing for today. Nothing for protection of your citizens today. 59% of the levy is going for promises in the past. Nothing for today. What you see happen is discretionary spending is shrinking. Everything else is on automatic pilot, and the numbers are going up every single year. So that means there'll be less and less to spend to take care of your community. Everything will be going to pay for the past. Let's look at this on a global perspective. When these problems exist in Europe and all across the world, when they try to fix it in some of these other states, if you use, for example, France, try to raise the retirement age by 2 years, people protested in the street and they had riots. In Italy, they tried to cut back on their spending to fund these unfunded liabilities, and they raised tuition at colleges and universities. The students got so upset they had this thing called Stop Everything Day. They blocked businesses, governmental agencies, you couldn't get into them. In Britain, they had protests, even threw rocks at Prince Charles Tower. Then let's look at Bolivia. Bolivia, on the other hand, wants to lower their retirement age. And when asked how they're going to fund it, they shrug their shoulders and they don't know. Well, they should look at our country and look at what we're trying to solve and the problems that happen down the road. I told you, as you go to the general, we did a report in 2005. The current Auditor General then started a new report in 2010. The problem we have is the condition is deteriorating. Everything is going in the wrong direction. The word's out there, no one's taking action. And you know, if we don't fix this problem, forget about having budget deficits, forget about having pension deficits. Really, I think we have to look at each other and say what we have is a leadership deficit if we don't address this problem. It's that severe. Last couple of things I want to tell you. You look at the pensions, there are so many balls up in the air when you look at pensions. It's easy to get confused in it. Let's look at some of the things. There's a thing called the funding ratio. That's the difference between the assets you have and your liability. If you were in business and that was below 80%, there's all sorts of additional requirements. Reporting requirements, funding requirements. But it's usually the case in government. Government exempts itself from all these things. And what happens? All that freedom gets them into trouble. And we're in trouble. Let's look at another one. Let's look at the assumed rate of return. I know the treasurer will talk about some of those things, but you look at the annual rate of returns. You look at some of these cities and towns, 8.5%, 8.25%, 8%. That's what they think they're going to make on their money. Read the report, the General's report, the last 5-year average. 2.7%, 1.03, 0.77, not even close, to 8.5%. When you don't hit those numbers, your liability continues to go up. And you know what? I've spoken about this so many times. I have people give me so many arguments about this, and they said, well, look at the
Dow Jones Industrial Average. And I said, okay, I'll do that. The last 5 years, the average, 2.226%. You think that's too short? 10 years, 1.22%. That's not even close to 8.5%. So how can we use 8.5%? But I will tell you, in case you don't, that's not your trade to figure out the numbers. The lower that number, the higher the liability. And you know what? That liability, just by lowering the number, we're only telling you what the real number is. We're not increasing the liability. The problem is everyone thinks the liability is the number that's out there, and it's really too low because that assumed rate of return is too high. One other piece I want to tell you, another reason why it's deteriorating, cities and towns. Instead of paying 100% of the annual required contribution, are putting in less every single year. Less. They're not even putting what the actuary is telling them to do. You know, Albert Einstein said the most powerful force in the world is the power of compounding. If you keep that in mind, when you're a debtor, and we are a debtor, the power of compounding works against you. And that's exactly what's happening here. So my comments to you are, this is a call to action. This is simply not sustainable and requires leadership to make a positive change.
Thank you, Ernie. Just to put a different face, and I thought economics was a dismal science. I'm glad I didn't study accounting. Just to put a face before we move on to the local level. What the choices are: higher tuitions, less money for higher education, higher property taxes, less money for schools, less money to invest in activities and to incentivize the business climate. In 2001, the state of Rhode Island was spending about $128 million on its contribution to state employee teacher retirement systems. This year, Gina, I think the number will be about $360 million. And if we stay on track to fund the unfunded liability over the next 19 years, by the year 2029, it'll be $1 billion. And there's no way to tax your way out of that situation, so the state suffers. I think one of the most difficult jobs in public affairs today is being a mayor. Because a mayor is saddled with one revenue source, the property tax. Over the last 3 or 4 years, state aid to communities has been cut by $250 million. It's been cut by over $250 million. And yet, people like Mayor Fung have walked in and inherited situations that Ernie was describing. So, Mayor, let me ask you to kind of present an overview of the situation that you've inherited and how that situation is affecting your ability of the city to serve the people of Cranston.
Sure. Thank you so much, Gary. First of all, I do want to thank you, RI, for hosting this very important forum to talk about a critical issue, as Ernie and Gina are here with me, have been talking about for months now and years now for Ernie. Cranston is indicative of the problem overall that we're facing, as I'm sure many of you saw in yesterday's article in the Providence Journal. We have a very serious pension problem within the city of Cranston. And it's a pension problem that's built up over the years. And it's not one where we're sitting here trying to put the blame on her, because there's blame all around, from past mayors and councils to, the benefits that have been put into, and promised to the retirees at all levels. But the point in time that we are at now, exactly what Ernie was talking about, we can't afford to keep kicking the can down the road and passing this issue on, to the next generation. Many, past mayors, town administrators that have dealt with these issues want to just spread out the payments, re-amortize, and do whatever they can to get through these difficult times. But at some point in time, it's going to catch up to you. The costs are going to catch up to you, whether it's catching up with us or our kids or grandkids in the future. And this is why it's time now, as Ernie indicated, for action. But the problem is, this is not an easy subject to talk about. And while I'm very glad to see, this great turnout today with, people of different backgrounds, a lot of students to a lot of professionals, to a lot of the people from URI, I've gone around in the city of Cranston talking about Cranston's problems. As soon as you start throwing out these large numbers, and we're talking about Ernie's numbers, Gina's been out there, I've been out there talking about the numbers. When you're talking about numbers at this scale that the average taxpayer can't understand, their eyes start glazing over. When I'm talking about the pension problems in Cranston, smaller numbers, but same probably percentage-wise that the numbers that Ernie was talking about. I've got not just one pension problem to deal with. I've got several pensions operating within the city of Cranston. The one that's been talked about the most is the police and fire pension system, and it's a locally administered plan that's within the city of Cranston that deals with approximately 489 police and fire that were hired prior to 1995. And that total liability is about $300 million, and there's an unfunded liability of about $245 million just for that plan alone. On top of that locally administered plan, the rest of the police and fire, as well as the rest of the city employees and teachers, are in the state municipal employees retirement system. And they were all moved out, police and fire, after 1995, and the rest have been in there. So I've got those plans with different sets of benefits for many of the different employees that are there, from the firefighters, police, to the municipal employees, to the teachers. And more recently, as you heard during the introduction, I'm proud of the fact that we moved one of my major unions, the Teamsters. We were able to negotiate successfully to move new employees for many of the city hall employees out of this defined benefits plan into a defined contribution 401k type that's similar to what many people see in the private sector. But trying to keep track of all those different benefits, all those different numbers, it's very difficult. But the practical reality is all these large numbers are hamstringing a city's ability to grow efficiently in its operations. Because Cranston still is dealing with this crisis now, particularly as it relates to that locally administered plan that has that $245 million unfunded liability. Right now, as Ernie was talking about the annual required contribution, Cranston is supposed to put in for this fiscal year over $24 million. Unfortunately, the problem that I have is, in these tight times, I can't afford to put in that full amount. I'm trying to increase it because, as many of you that are probably aware, in government, especially at a local level, you've got to deal with the legislative body. And in tight times, that's the easy thing for them to grasp, to reduce what I've recommended for putting into these line items. And it's happened to me for the past 2 years. And I'm trying to get up to that 100% rate, but it's difficult to do because there's only so much that you can put on the taxpayers. So out of that $24 million, this budget year, I've recommended putting 20, which is about 83% or 84% funding. I'm trying to do the best that I can, but if I were to put in that full extra $4 million, it's all going to be put on the backs of the taxpayers. And this is some of the problems that we have, because the more that you have to reach towards those 100% goals, and it's a laudable goal. you really should be hitting that 100% funding, because if not, it's just going to increase your arc every single year. The more you put in, though, means the less that you have to deal with services. And overall, our city budget is $245 million. And when you back out what I give over to the schools, running the city's operation is only about $113 million. I've had to put in this budget year, $20 million just for that closed pension plan. On top of that, as you all know, I also have a contribution that I'm required to fund at 100% for the pension plan into the state. And that this year is going to be about another $5 million that I have to contribute. So as you can see, close to a quarter of my city's budget, which is a little bit better than Central Falls, but a quarter of my city's budget goes into just pension costs. If I would have funded 100%, adding that extra $4 million on top of also funding, as Ernie described, the retiree health care, that OPEB liability that we have, that would dramatically increase from 25% up to about 33 to 34% of the city's budget. So it's either going to come somewhere, either from further cuts in city services or increased taxes. And in these difficult times, I can't just justify putting it all on taxpayers' backs. And that's why we're here, because this problem is a long, systemic problem that for years, many people have buried in. One of the things that you probably read about in the Providence Journal article was certain retirees, and this is with the locally administered plan, in Cranston, get a 3% minimum compounding cost of living adjustment, or the same raise that the active firefighters get. So in other words, if you get a minimum 3% compounded, or if the active firefighters get a 4%, they get that 4%. On top of that, I think you saw in the article, some in that plan also get the 5%, extra 5% when they reach age 55. So in theory, at that point in time, at 55, you can get total 8%, bump in that year. We, as a council, and when Mayor Laffey was the mayor at the time, tried to make those changes, the unilateral that everyone wants us to do. We lost the case in arbitration, and then lost the case in front of a very good judge in the Superior Court, the same judge that supported us on the crossing guards case. So a lot of times, what we can do as municipal officials are really hamstrung legally with those obligations, yes, those promises of the past that have been put in place by past administrations and past decisions that have put us where we are today. And legally, as mayor, I've got to follow a lot of those precedents. And that judge, in that decision, put it more aptly when he said that, look, I don't know who it was that put it into those collective bargaining agreements, but once they did, the only way you can make changes is to get it out through collective bargaining and negotiating it out. And it gets more and more difficult, particularly for me in Cranston, with that closed pension system, because out of the 489 total people that we have in it, I only have approximately 58 or 59 that are still active employees. And every time, and they're contributing into the system to help fund part of it, but as more and more of those retirees go out, more and more pressures are going to be added onto the taxpayers to make up that difference. So it's a never-ending, continuing problem that whether it's for that system or even as a system going forward when we're making changes, in one of the recommendations that I've put forward is continue to move into a defined contribution type plan. You're going to have problems in the future too if you don't do it in the right way and have the foresight to set up a plan to address the funding of your past obligations. So overall, this isn't an easy issue that we're here discussing, but it's one that definitely is needed to have the discussions now, because there are a lot of challenges that are facing us. But Cranston is indicative of the problem that's facing the state, but also every city and town across the country, because pension retiree health care costs are strangling most municipalities across the country, and we won't be healthy to grow as a city unless there's some scaling back of the benefit side and doing what we can, because we can't just put it back strictly on the backs of the taxpayers. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. You know, the news doesn't get any better as you move down the table. You know, we've spoken about draconian measures. I think I heard the phrase mentioned 2 or 3 times. We can't keep on kicking the can down the hill. We're not meeting needs of people. Mayor introduced the concept of legacy costs, which I think Ford and General Motors were familiar with, you know, as well. And there's this, you know, there's this saying that if you're in a hole, you know, stop digging. And I'm confident that as we move down the table, we're going to find out how to stop digging. The mayor mentioned something that we'll come back to later because it's an important question. And the important question is, how do you address this issue fairly? You know, recognizing that as you change public pensions, you do affect public service. And public service is very important. So we have to have balance in this conversation as well. But let me go to the treasurer and ask her, you know, what condition did you find the state's employee retirement system in? And give us some hope. Tell us how you're approaching the problem.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you to Mark and to URI for having me this evening. As Gary mentioned, I'm a newcomer to politics, and this is my first foray into politics. And when I was on the campaign trail, by far the most common question that I received was, you know, tell me why you're doing this. You're leaving a great job, you have a young family, why would you do this? And I have to say, listening to this tonight, I am starting to wonder. No, but in all seriousness, it's wonderful to be here, and I appreciate you all coming out. And look, the reason that I ran for office is the reason that you're all here tonight, which is that we care about this state. We care deeply about our community. We care deeply about our future. And you came out tonight because you care, because you want to learn, and you want to see what you can do. And that's why I decided to step up and run for office, and why I've decided, you know, the pension isn't an issue. It's the issue, as far as I'm concerned. And you've heard from the mayor and you've heard from Ernie. The numbers are mind-boggling. You know, Gary Sasse mentioned, if we do nothing, in about 15 years, $1.2 billion will have to come out of our state budget to pay into this pension system. It is the issue, and we have a choice. It is our choice to decide to fix it once and for all in a way that is fair to employees, retirees, and taxpayers. Or we can choose to do nothing, and the consequences will be truly devastating. I will say, in terms of the picture, I don't want to, you know, tell you too many statistics. Ernie did a great job with the overview. You know, what did I inherit? It is not a pretty picture. I mean, the state system, no matter how you decide to look at it, I didn't inherit a well-funded system. I find myself as a fiduciary of a system which is about 48% funded. If we were in a private labor union, if we were in a corporation, if it were a Taft-Hartley plan, it would be in what they call the red zone. You know, anything below 80% is not well funded, below 60% is a problem. Our state system is 48% funded. And as has already been mentioned, it would require about $7 billion into the system today in order for it to be fully funded. So again, it's hard to get your head around $7 billion and less than 50% funded. But what I've inherited is a system that is that needs changes. It is fundamentally broken and underfunded. In terms of my approach, people, you know, Gary says, "What are you going to do about it? How do you fix it?" I think the first step in fixing this is what we're doing right now, is talking about it. Talking about it honestly. Not pretending it's smaller than it is, not pretending it's bigger than it is, but truly looking at the math. You know, pension math is pretty simple, actually. You know, it's what do we owe relative to what we have. It's pretty simple, assets minus liabilities. And we have to be honest about that math, because if we're not, someone's going to get hurt. Employees will get hurt, retirees will get hurt, taxpayers will get hurt. You know, I talk a lot on the campaign about let's be truthful, truth in numbers. You know, there's issues of fairness around all of this, and I try to be sympathetic to all of these issues of fairness. We have a multi-billion-dollar math problem that isn't going to go away. It will not go away. It will get harder to fix every day that we avoid it. You talk about compounding. Every day we don't fix it, it gets a little bit harder to fix. You know, it's been interesting reading the Providence Journal. You read 10 years ago, we knew it was a problem. 15 years ago, we knew it was a problem. We didn't do enough then, and the problem's bigger now and harder to fix now. So I think we must be honest. We also have to be compassionate, and I mean that very sincerely. These talks of whether it's cuts in services, which the mayor has so eloquently laid out for us tonight, or cuts in benefits, this is tough stuff. You know, it's very hard to say to someone, we might not have enough money in the system to make good on the promises we've made to you. And I don't think it's fair or just or compassionate or right to take that lightly. On the flip side, I know it's wrong to pretend that we can make good on promises that we won't ever be able to. And that, you know, people say to me, what keeps you up at night? That's what keeps me up at night. I talk a lot of, my daughter's in first grade at Providence Public School, and I am deeply indebted to her teachers, who are phenomenal. And I look at these teachers. I look at her first grade teacher. She's in her mid-30s. She works hard. She pays for the crayons and the notebooks out of her own pocket. She's paying in 9.25% of every single paycheck into her pension. She endures furlough days and, you know, works in a tough environment. All of them were just fired in Providence. It's tough. I understand that. And now she has to listen to me talk about a pension system that's crumbling. But what I want to make sure of is I can look her in the eye and say, this is a benefit we can afford. In 30 years, when it's time for you to retire, you will get this benefit. And today, I'm afraid I can't do that. And as a fiduciary of a system that is 50% underfunded, that is a problem that I have to work to fix. It's legally the right thing to do, and it's morally the right thing to do. The other thing that keeps me up at night is wondering, where will the money come from? $1.2 billion out of a $3 billion tax base. Again, I believe it's dishonest to say to someone, we're ever going to have that amount of money to be able to put into the pension. I'm very pleased to say that in the 3.5 months that I've been in office, we have taken a few steps already, I think, in the right direction. The first step is in working with Governor Chafee, we have prevented reamortization of the pension debt, at least for this year. And here's why that's so important. You know, it's a little bit like what Ernie said. If you fundamentally have too much debt, you need to fix that problem. Pushing the debt out into the future is not a way to fix it. And actually, it's worse than that, because what reamortization does is it takes money out of the pension system today to balance the budget, and that's money that could be in a pension invested for 20, 30 years and growing, compounding all along the way. So, reamortization is very bad for retirees and state employees, because it takes assets out of their system, which is already woefully underfunded, and it balances the budget on the backs of our state employees and retirees. And it's just bad, it's bad math. To save $30 million today to cost $1 billion in 20 years, even my first grader could figure that one out. That's a bad deal. So I'm pleased to say that that's been taken off the table. And the other big step we've taken this year is I chair the retirement board of the state. And about 2 weeks ago, the retirement board voted to reduce the rate of return assumption from 8.25 to 7.5. And we also changed the way we look at mortality to more accurately reflect the fact that people are living longer. And this is critical. Now some people may be saying, well, gosh, Treasurer, 7.5 is still pretty high. And I can appreciate why you'd be saying that. But back to my first point, it's about honesty and accuracy and truthfulness. And what we did, that was a tough vote to take. I'm very proud of the work that the retirement board did in choosing to do the right thing and face the reality. Because the very first step in fixing this problem is having accurate numbers and being honest about the problem that we face. And so in adopting the actuarial recommendations, particularly around rate of return and mortality, we're one step closer to fixing this problem because we're one step closer to knowing precisely how big it is. I would say, Rhode Island is not alone in facing this. There are estimates that nationwide there are between $2 and $3 trillion of unfunded pension liability. Again, how do you even get your head around $2 or $3 trillion? To put it in perspective for you, the TARP bailout at its peak, we were prepared to spend about $700 billion. So the pension problem is many times that. Savings and loan bailout was several hundred billion. We're talking $3 trillion. It's a monumental problem, and one that we have to fix. And I'd like to see Rhode Island be a leader in fixing it. And I guess I will leave you. I know we're going to have time for Q&A, so I'll wrap up my comments. But it's easy when you think about the pension to get wrapped up in how funded is it, what's the unfunded liability, how much are people paying in. But I'll leave you with this thought. At the end of all the numbers, there are people. There are people who will suffer if we don't fix this. If we don't fix this, there will be someone who relies on the RIPTA bus to get to work every day, and that bus might not be running because there'll be more cuts in the budget. There'll be a young teacher who might not be able to look at a pension in 35 years when it's time for them to retire. And that is what I try to remind myself of every day. I try to remind myself of the first grade teachers, of the people I work with in the State House. And I'm actually reminded of myself when I was a youngster. It's always nice to be on a podium and hear the nice stuff about Harvard and Yale and successful career, none of which would have been possible without public libraries, public buses, public schools, the GI Bill that sent my father to college. And at the end of poor choices, our children today, the future of our state, who need these public services. And also retirees who deserve to be told the truth and who deserve a secure retirement. So I applaud you all for coming out tonight, and I ask you to stay focused on this issue. It is the issue. It's the single fastest growing line item in the state budget. It's the single fastest growing line item in most municipal budgets. It won't fix itself. It won't go away. So coming here tonight, you've engaged in the problem, and I applaud you for that. And I ask you to continue to do that until we fix it. Thank you.
Well, finally some hope. I learned that we're not going to use gimmicks anymore. We're not going to do reamortization. We're going to disclose, and I think sunshine is really very important for this process. But my question is this, because I think everyone recognizes that there's a serious problem here, and certainly the three panelists have made that abundantly clear. I'd like to ask the panelists, what are the obstacles to developing a workout plan? We've defined the problem. We're going to be compassionate, but it's pretty direct math. And so why can't we move forward on a workout plan? What are the obstacles? I'll start with you, Ernie. And you
Well, one of the first obstacles would be that time is running out, and every day this number gets compounded. And every time someone doesn't put in the 100%, the number continues to go up. So you have to keep that in mind, that credit card, that's like a line of credit on your home, that you're financing your current day spending by taking out this debt. So one of the things that happens all the time is we'll do it in several pieces. The first one is I'll start with the citizens first, that we really don't as citizens participate in the process, to go to the council meetings, to go to hearings, to talk about these numbers and make ourselves aware. Another obstacle is that a lot of the elected officials that come in that deal with the negotiations of these contracts, it is not their skill set, but they still try to negotiate the deal. And I'm a firm believer that if you have an actuary at the table when you're negotiating, so you actually know how much everything costs, that would help you determine the numbers. So part of it is the skill set that's at the table is causing a problem. Another obstacle is, I really believe, a lot of times in the negotiating process, that everyone's sitting on the same side of the table instead of one on one side of the table, one on the other side of the table. And the reason why I say that is the fact that I mentioned before about a good political decision, a good financial decision, a lot of times butt heads. And so it's easy to fall into a trap of I want to be reelected and this will help me to be reelected, and to make that choice as opposed to the one that will cause pain. Because remember what I said, as citizens, we say we want progress, but we don't want change. So in the end, someone who sticks their neck out and exercises leadership, like a mayor, like Treasurer Raimondo, that do the right thing, like the pension board voting to reduce the rate of return, to tell everyone what the true picture is, we have to remember, we have to be there to support them, because they've exercised leadership, and now they need us to be there when everyone comes after them for making that decision, which is really just telling the truth and solving the problem.
Let me ask the mayor. I don't know if you recall John Kennedy's book, Profile and Courage. There were 12 chapters. Who's going to write the 13th chapter in Rhode Island? And what about the comments that Ernie made on skills, negotiating skills, citizens' involvement? You're on the ground in Cranston. How do you react to that?
No, I absolutely agree with Ernie and everything that he said. I'm very fortunate in a sense that I've got a legal background. I've been in negotiations on multi-million-dollar contracts, not only just here in Rhode Island, but from my prior employer. So the numbers aren't scary to me. But what is really adept, and Ernie hit the nail right on the head, is you've got in some cities and towns people that aren't adept, and you need to make sure that there's consistency at that chief executive level, because many of the employees of the unions that are on the opposite side of the table, I can guarantee you they can pinpoint every single provision in the collective bargaining agreement, when they got it, what they gave up for it, and management's at a disadvantage. You need someone that really has that ability to sit across the table, understand from a legal perspective, and negotiate collectively for what's in the best interest of, in my case, 82,000 residents in Cranston, because I've got to keep in the back of mind what's affordable to them and what's also sustainable for the health of our city. So it's not an easy thing to do. And it is a balancing, and for me, I also have to deal with the council as well. So there's a lot of difficulties, but one of the things that you have to go into is you have to understand the numbers. And I want to echo what Ernie's saying. Right now, I'm getting a lot of pressure from many of my residents. You can't raise taxes. You can't do this. I'm trying piecemeal to get the city back on track from the 2 years worth of cuts that we've been sustaining from the state, fixing structural deficit holes from the last administration and prior administrations. In pensions, this is not an overnight solution that you're going to wave a magic wand and have everything solved. But you need the numbers people and people to get you to the table to say, okay, and actuaries are the right people. And in fact, before I even start the discussions with my unions on the pension discussions, I'm going to be sitting down with my actuaries and saying, okay, here's my ideas of how I can peel back some of the benefits. Which ones are going to save me how much, or what do you think are the real, nitty-gritty, reforms that are going to save me some money and not some low-hanging fruit that might get me elected because I can get out there and champion, I got pension reform. But what's really going to make a difference? So getting really sound advice is a critical key. And if you don't have the legal experience, getting good labor counsel, but also getting a numbers person is critical.
Let me ask you a follow-up question, Mayor, because we have 39 cities effectively negotiating with 2 unions. So there are tactical and strategic considerations. Can the state do anything to help? Is the state part of the problem?
Absolutely. Like I mentioned before, one of the constraints on cities and towns that's a big challenge is the fact that I can guarantee you, I think almost in every city and town, the pension benefits and retiree health care are in the collective bargaining agreements. That's different from the changes that the state made. The state were done by statute. And because it's in the collective bargaining, you're going to have to negotiate this out. And we're going to have to collectively, and this is the problem, there's so many different plans out there, different benefits, it's tough to get uniformity. And to really resolve the problem, you need a global help from the state, the General Assembly, for many of the reforms, because this piecemeal stuff can't happen quick enough to save a lot of the plans that are particularly in a lot of jeopardy.
So it really is a question of the state and the cities and towns recognizing their partners and not adversaries.
Absolutely. And we're gonna have to work together to get through this problem. And many of the mayors and town administrators already have been working together to try to advocate for many of the reforms, particularly in these areas on pension retirees.
I know from personal experience, a couple of years ago, there was a package of bills put in to give communities the tools. And we had a difficult time getting a hearing in the Assembly on any of those bills. So, Gina, I'm sorry, Mayor. No, please, go ahead.
And that's difficult because many of these discussions are difficult, and difficult enough in the sense that we also need people that have an understanding, residents, to be up there advocating for us, because it's very difficult when legislators don't hear about the real-world impacts to the residents. They can hear from the experts like us about there. They can hear from the union members, but they also need to hear from all of you about what it could mean to you.
No, I just wanted to follow on briefly about that, about the question about the obstacles. I think if we're going to solve this problem, we have to realize truly we're all in this together, and it's in everyone's interest to solve this problem. Unfortunately, as the mayor said, whenever you bring up the word pension, in fact, I wish I could figure out a way to talk about I often say retirement security and the retirement system, because just the word pension makes people go crazy. A lot of people are saying, on either side of it. I've had people chase me down to my car saying, well, I'm in the 401k. What's wrong with that? Why can't the state folks have that? On the flip side, I've had teachers chase me out to my car saying, don't touch my benefits. And, it's being in the middle of that, it's challenging. And as I say, the thing we all have to realize, the number one obstacle to fixing this is this system isn't working for anyone. No one today. If we don't fix it, it'll run out, and that's not fair. If we don't fix it and we keep on the schedule we're on now, it'll bankrupt the state, and that's not a good idea. And also, along the way, your taxes will go up. Every state employee will suffer more furlough days and, less money into good services that we care about. If you're an active worker today in the state system, I should have said earlier, the system that I oversee is state employees and teachers. It's about 55,000 people in the plan. If you're an active worker today, 2/3 of the money you're putting into the pension goes for accrued service. Think about that. So the teacher I was talking about, or pick anything, a teacher, any kind of state employee, you pay in your 8.5 or 9.25%. 2/3 of that is going out the door to pay for accrued service. So all I'm trying to say is I'm not sure who this system is working for. I think we're in this together, taxpayers, employees, retirees, more than we might want to realize. And the number one obstacle is somehow to move past the emotion and the baggage and really legitimate issues of fairness and realize, okay, this is broken, it's not working, let's fix it. And oh, by the way, I think fix it once and for all. You know, there's been probably, 4, 5, 6 rounds of pension reform in the past handful of years. Also not good for everyone. We still have a huge problem. If you're a state employee, that's tough. How are you supposed to plan for your retirement when you don't know what's going to happen next year and the next year and the next year? So I think as hard as it is, we must fix it, and we have to do it once and for all, which is going to be big changes. I don't know precisely what it'll look like. As Alan said, it took us 30 years to get into this mess. We can't fix it in a few months, but it's going to have to be a fundamental reform to once and for all put the system on fair footing, stable footing, and truly provide for retirement security that we can all afford.
Ernie, you want to say something?
Yes, if I could add on, Gary, your question about partnering with the state. I'll give you a positive example and a negative example. The first one, the positive one, obviously would be, I want to start with positives, but to me, I don't believe that cities and towns should have their own pension funds and invest their own money. I've been saying this for a long time. I think when you have someone like Gina Raimondo as a state treasurer and the quality of and the talent that they have, all those pension funds should be up at the state level. And what would happen is you'd lower the overall cost of your investments because of the critical mass. You'd have more diversity, which reduces risk. And you'd have this incredible talent making pension decisions up at that level. So I think partnering with the state on that would be a great example. But I'll give you a bad example, too. When you look at the city of Central Falls and the problems they're having when the governor put in a non-judicial receiver, one of the first things that took place was they had a big deficit, and what they said is, how much are we supposed to put in the pension plan? And when they told them it was in the millions, they said, well, we won't make that contribution this year, so the problem's much smaller, and that's absolutely not true. So that's a real poor example to show other communities how to solve a problem.
Yeah, I think you were beginning to identify, and I have one more question, then we'll open it up to the group. I think we're beginning to identify, where some relatively low-hanging fruit is, and we're recognizing that from a governance perspective, we can do better, and that from a governance perspective is not necessarily taking anything away from anybody, but it's operating the system more efficiently, and that would be helpful. But my question is this, and I'll start with Gina. Everyone's talked about having equilibrium between balance and fairness, and certainly you have to be concerned about how any pension change affects the quality of service delivery. But at the end of the day, can you really solve this problem without making changes to benefits? Because that has been clearly the experience in the private sector. I'll start with Gina.
I think it goes back to what I said earlier about pension math being pretty simple, which is to say, there's no way to fix this problem without, if you want to have a certain level of benefit, then you have to pay in a greater amount, whether that comes from the employee or the employer. And, today, again, to me, this is all about retirement security and making sure that people have a secure retirement. Often you'll hear, if you work for the state and you retire and you receive 80% of your final average pay, and then you have Social Security on top of that, and then you have 3% COLA on top of that, and you retire when you're 62 and you live for 20 years, very likely you'll be making more by the time your pension's over than you're making in your last year, or than the active person in that job today is making. Now, can you maintain that quote-unquote generous benefit level? There's no magic. It's just a function of how much the employee can put in and how much the employer can put in. So when people say to me, what's the right number? This is simple arithmetic and figuring out what's the amount that has to go in over a period of time to get it out the other end. What we know for a fact, to answer your question, is that the arithmetic we have today doesn't work because our system's less than 50% funded and the tax levy's going through the roof to afford it. So my answer is typically, I don't have the answer, but everything has to be on the table. And that's not because it's what I want, but it's because the math doesn't lie, and we have to figure out, how to make sure it all adds up.
Mayor?
No, I would agree with that. And, Cranston, and I failed to mention this, we're in a very dangerous situation with that locally administered plan. It's only about 18% assets, total assets, for that ratio. So if I were to do these one-time things like Central Falls or even in Cranston in the past, with past mirrors, where I've just used up the assets, I only have enough to pay about 2.5 years, possibly 3 years worth of claims, and then that's it. Then we're out of money. Then retirees stop getting paychecks. But the question just fundamentally comes back to, how do we pay for it? And I believe it has to be a combination of reforms of the benefit side, because if you don't do the corresponding reforms, all you're doing is putting on the city of Cranston and ultimately the taxpayers. Because any city in town, there's only so many buckets that we have of revenue coming in. And for Cranston, I can tell you, property taxes are the largest, state aid, it's almost gone, and federal aid, they're cutting. And then this small sliver, what we call business revenue, that everyone thinks, you make great money from writing tickets, from the building inspection fees that you get in, every clerk's money. That's only about less than 5% of my total revenues coming in. So as you can see, property tax is a large one, and it's a question of fairness to everyone in this system, the taxpayers, the employees, and we got to all share, but the reforms have to be part of that process, or else it's all going to be put unfairly on one group.
And you have to balance, because you have conflicting state laws. There's a state law which limits how much money you can raise, and there's a state law that mandates you spend more than you can raise.
Absolutely, and that's one of the other challenges, and why we need help from the state too, because with some of the laws that have been put into place, we really have been so hamstrung on a lot of different areas about how we can raise revenue, and it makes it even more challenging and more of an impact. I'll probably say it'll have more of a devastating impact on existing services, because it's not about making strategic cuts anymore for the city of Cranston. My next move, if it's going to be these large expenses that keep coming, is which department am I going to be shutting down? It's not about laying off a few people here and there. I've already done all that. So it's some very difficult times.
Ernie, you've done more studies of this than I think anyone here, so how do we do it?
Well, there's a few things. I think it's a combination of the addressing the benefits and additional revenue taxes to pay the bill. It's pretty easy. A lot of people want to just blame the unions for the problem, and that'd be a mistake, because I was the Auditor General for 15 years, and in those 15 years, there were a lot of time, all the time, the employees had the money taken out of their pay, and it wasn't all the time that the mayors and the council put all the money into the pension plan. They used that money to do other things. So there's enough blame to go around for everyone. So just to blame that would be completely unfair. But I do think a lot of those benefits are not sustainable. And personally, I have a problem with someone, for example, say a sergeant who's retired making more money than a sergeant on the street today who's actually doing the job. So examples like that just show you that there's certain things that are out of control. And the last point I would make to you, the reason why there's two pieces to this, the reason why there has to be addressed by both, is the more sophisticated person that's out there looking to buy a home, for the most part in the past, they looked at, do they have a good school system? I'll move to that town. Well, now I think the more sophisticated person today is going to say, do they have a good school system? How much do they have in unfunded liabilities? Because I know what that means. That means my taxes are going up. And the second thing is, to just put it on the employees would be the wrong thing as well. Because when you look at the young people graduating from a college or university today who think about going to work in government, why would they come if they're paying so much of their pay for the people that went through the job before them? They'll just decide to go somewhere else, or probably, unfortunately, leave this state. So I'll end with that.
We have about 10 minutes before I open it to questions. Does anybody on the panel have anything they feel they'd like to add or say? Got a question?
First off, I'd like to thank you all for coming today. I think the intention was to be informative and honest, and you've done that. My question would be, is there an inherent conflict of interest between those negotiating with organized labor and unions? And as Ernie said, you don't want to put the blame just on unions, because that, as we've mentioned, it's everyone's fault. We're all in it together. But going forward, it seems to me the most logical approach would be to adopt some sort of 401k plan. As you said, Gina, people have yelled at you driving. But as I understand, it's hard to go away from the status quo. And also there's a conflict of interest between elected officials and their constituents, because regardless of your decisions, and they're all hard decisions, you're going to step on a lot of toes. So I would ask, do we need to have a separation between elected officials and those negotiating contracts? And also, is it possible that the government should not be providing pensions for going forward? And I'm not suggesting we run away from our previous promises, but going forward, is it reasonable that we should aim to get away from pensions, which have proven to be unsustainable?
Who wants to start? You want to start?
I can tell you, from the negotiating standpoint, you're going to have to trust, unfortunately, the elected officials that you put in. That's why, during the election process, asking those same questions that you're asking right now about what's your solution, who do you stand for, when you're at the bargaining table, what are you going to be asking? Those are the questions that you really have to ask of those people that are running for office, because that's going to be critically important, because they are the ones that are going to be there negotiating on your side. Like I said before, you're going to need someone that has that ability in making sure that you do the right thing. But in the past, you've had, public officials, like you saw in yesterday's article, the 5-minute police chief. You're going to get that. It's sad to say, but that's what's happened in the past, and it's the leaders that you live with. I'm not sure if it's a conflict. It just depends on who you have in the office, you're negotiating it. For me, I've been pretty open about where I stand, where we should go, and, I do support moving to a defined contribution 401k type plan for new and just keep going forward. But it's not that easy, though, because once you move there, one of the things that we don't do is pay into Social Security. So you're going to have to adjust your existing operations to make up for some of those differences as you're making the transition. But you're also going to have to think about overall, when you switch over, how are you going to pay for that going forward too? So it's not as easy just switch it over. You're going to have to think long and hard about how to do it too.
Okay.
Just briefly to comment about the question about the conflict. I do think that whatever shape that our reform takes, we ought to have a solution which is self-correcting and does take the pension issue out of the hands of politicians to whatever extent we can. I fully agree with whoever it was that said it's not the fault of state employees that we're in this mess. It's absolutely not their fault. It's the system is broken.
Great.
And it was set up by politicians who, as somebody said, it's easier to give something away today when you don't have to pay for it till 10, 20 years down the road. In the private sector and in private labor unions, plumbers, pipe fitters, building trades, They all have, they're all governed by ERISA, and they're all governed by the Pension Protection Act. So they have self-correcting mechanisms such that, which will prevent you from ever getting into this problem we're in now, in the case of the state, of having a system that's just 48% underfunded, and they kind of immunize the system a little bit from political pressure. And I do think that that's the direction that public pension funds all over the country need to go. It happened in the corporate world, it's happened in the federal government, and I think it ought to come to the municipal sector.
Anybody else, Jerry?
Sure. It's a pretty difficult question that you asked, and because you could argue both sides of that one. One of them, I would tell you that I love American because we're a democracy, so I like it being an elected official, and then we have the election that we can decide whether they did a good job or not. A bureaucrat is good in a way, but a bureaucrat could be bad. It goes back to Roman times when there was a Senator Cicero who said that they have too much power, the bureaucrats, and they're not responsible to the people. So it's sort of like a king without a crown. So there's some danger in having a bureaucrat. But I agree with the treasurer and the mayor. I mean, if there's some sort of check and balance to the system, that'd be good to have. Like one of the things I always said is if you had an actuary there at the table, and if they made a change to the pension that would make the pension go lower than 80% funded, then it'd have to be funded immediately. Well, then you wouldn't make that decision because you wouldn't have the money to put it in to bring it back to 80%. So you can have some measures, some checks and balances like the treasurer's mentioned to keep it in line. But there's a problem both ways, the elected official and the bureaucrat.
All right, thank you very much.
I want to thank Gina for bringing this whole issue of pensions from her position as general treasurer, making a lot of noise about it. Thank you very much. I think you are term limited, but I'm not sure, Alex, you are as mayor. You are? I mean,
8 years, term limit.
Okay, so you had a life before mayor, and you will have a life after mayor. Reading between the lines of what you're saying, I think you're telling us that no matter what I try to do within my town, it's not going to be enough to solve the problem. That's what I'm hearing from you. And we all know that politics is the art of the doable, the art of the possible. So we can have all these wonderful things we'd love to do if we had power, but we can't do them. However, Ms. Raimondo, you bring up a very good point about who is this system working for. And it's probably not working for Ernie's family if he's burdened with a $91,000 tax bill with all of his kids and anybody else who's got 5 kids or 4 kids. It's probably not working for them. And you mentioned fairness over and over again, and you just have to make sure fairness is the thing here. But I think everybody realizes that the change. We need dramatic change here. And you talked about your daughter's teacher. She's actually in a good position. If she got into a defined contribution.
Excuse me, is there a question buried in this?
Yeah, could we move, defined contributions, businesses have gone there for a long time, and there's a reason for that. Maybe the state needs to go there in a massive way so that they know what their liabilities are. And you guys are in a position to do that. Thank you.
Any response?
Thank you for your question, and thank you for your kind comments. As I said earlier, I think to fix this, we have to look at everything, and everything should be on the table. My own view is I don't think a 401k is necessarily the solution or an easy solution. And what we in the defined benefit world, all the risk is on the state. In our case, the taxpayer. In the defined contribution world, all the risk is on the individual. And I think the average amount in a 401k today is about $60,000. So I'm not sure that that's retirement security. Having said that, it's not about the structure, whether it's if it's 401k or defined benefit. That's just an administrative way to look at a system. And actually, we know that administering a 401k system is quite a bit more expensive than administering a defined benefit system. So it's all about the benefit level vis-a-vis the contributions and what's affordable. Furthermore, in Rhode Island today, in the state system, I can't speak to the municipalities, we have a very mature system. What does that mean? It means we have about one employee for every retiree. That's not a good place to be. You know, we need a lot of young people to be paying into the system for the retirees, and those lines are about to cross. Right, we're about to be we will soon be in a situation where we have more retirees than employees. Again, an unsustainable fact. So the switch to the 401k is very expensive in terms of transition cost because you'll have nobody else left paying into the system. So I hear what you're saying, and I think there may be a role for a component of defined contribution, but I do believe that you can have a fiscally sustainable, responsible, defined benefit program, and that actually the administration of that can be less expensive than in a 401k. You cannot have a system like we have today where, you know, clearly we're not paying enough and the bill's coming due and we're $7 billion overdrawn.
Yes,
that gets to the comment I had on that was the assumption that the 401k is the only alternative. And I think you explained some of the problems inherent in that. In fact, if we had gone that route with Social Security as the previous administration had wanted, we'd be in much tougher shape. I'm wondering if the folks who are looking at this at the state level are looking at the pension, a hybrid pension system that was described in When I'm 64, the book by Teresa Ghilarducci, who is an economist from Notre Dame. And it was very intriguing to read that, to find, and when you said we want to fix it and fix it once and for all, maybe that's a pathway we should be looking at. And I also hope that we can learn from those 9 or 10 of the world's most powerful economies that are able to provide a very good pension system.
Right. I just very briefly to address that. Thank you. The federal system is a hybrid program, and if you interview federal retirees, they say that they feel secure. It's actually very interesting, right? Whereas if you interview folks who are in a defined benefit or in 401k, there's not a lot of feeling of security. And the federal system is in pretty good shape. So I think that it's a very good model to look at, and I think it balances nicely all of the things we have to talk about, you know, risk sharing as well as administrative ease, and again, providing a floor of retirement security, which I believe is an important, societal goal. Having said that, any solution, and what I'm about to say is a tough fact, so please don't throw anything at me, but any solution that only impacts new employees will not solve this problem. That's just a mathematical fact. Because all these big scary numbers that we've been throwing out, $7 billion unfunded, it's all for accrued service.
Could you explain what that means, accrued service?
Work that's already been done. So if you were to say, in fact, even if you were to say, starting today, all new employees, 401k, and the state doesn't match. I'm not saying we should do that. I'm just saying the most draconian, you know, 401k and the state puts in nothing, you still have a $7 billion unfunded liability today. So any solution that only impacts new employees, unfortunately, doesn't get us out of this hole.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, one of the quick examples of what I was talking about, highlighting, you know, what Gina was talking about, is that old police and fire pension system. As we shifted out into the state, now that you've got less active people helping to fund retirees, you're still going to have to pay that cost. So the transition cost, you have to think long-term about those too. And that was done back in the mid-90s. So at some point in time, it will catch up if you don't do it in the right way. Whatever system, whether it's defined contribution or hybrid.
One of the main obstacles in solving this problem is that we really don't have all of the people involved in Rhode Island trying to work towards a solution. In fact, if we look at some of the key players in major organizations, major companies, we see that they have a nonprofit status. I think it's really time to look at the federal statutes, the IRS guidelines, the state statutes, and the definition of charitable funding to make sure that all of the organizations that have that status truly warrant it.
Ernie? No? Thank you. Two more questions. Yes, sir.
Manage being short here. I was trying to sort of understand sort of the structure of this discussion. And one of the things the treasurer asked at one point that the sort of public officials have this obligation to tell us the truth. Right? And the question occurred to me is, what is the truth?
Can you step closer to the microphone, please?
Yep, I'm sorry. Okay. So the question is, what is the truth? And the first thing I put into my little question here is 7.5%, right? Which is what we're adjusting this rate of return to from, what is it, 8.7 or something like that, right? I mean, I look at where this country is going. Look at what treasuries are paying today, right? The risks in equities, which I don't think you can put pension money into. I don't know how that works exactly, right? 7.5% to me is absolutely off the wall, right? There's not a prayer in getting 7.5%. If you look at Rhode Island demographics as a state, right, because all this is about really is the economy. People have to pay taxes, which can be allocated to compassionate endeavors, to high return endeavors like education, roads, other kinds of infrastructure. If people in Rhode Island don't pay taxes, nothing of this is achievable. And if you look at the demographics in the state, which is that wealthy people are either stable or moving out, and uneducated, untrained, people with high state costs attached to them, including special ed and a problem which we haven't solved yet, right? Haven't come close to solving if you look at what's happening at just today's article in Mount Hope. If you look at the U.S. economy, what's happening in this country with outsourcing, where a few people are getting paid lots of money, but there's this enormous vacuum in the middle where these well-paying middle-class jobs, take the example of the auto industry, right? I don't know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you could, in those dollars, I think auto workers were earning $50 an hour, plus they had benefits. And don't hold me exactly these numbers. Today, a lot of that manufacturing is overseas, whether it's in parts or actually the entire automobile. A lot of it is done here in Mississippi maybe, or Georgia, Alabama or something like that. But people there are getting paid $14 an hour for doing that assembly line work. And I don't know what their benefits are, but those are today's dollars, not yesterday's dollars, right? Again, if you go back to the your rate of return, yes, we may get higher rates of return, but the thing is, net of inflation, what will those returns be? Right? We are, I think, I see it as a just unbelievably difficult situation, and I don't see any way out of this. But the question is,
thank you.
The question is, what assumptions are you making about the economy of Rhode Island and the United States, because that's a critical part of that, going out for, let's say, for the next 10 years, in order for you to have the revenues that you can actually be compassionate, whatever that may mean. And at what point will someone, anybody, do some kind of a model which takes into account some of the realistic, most, let's say, reasonable base projections about what's going to happen, and actually put in some details, this is a question, right,
okay, yeah,
about where we're going, what could possibly this thing look like 10 years from now. And I think you owe it to us. And I personally think politicians are aspiring gubernatorial candidates.
That was the question. We had the question.
Good. Good luck.
Let me start by just saying this before Gina speaks. There was a study recently done in Wisconsin that looked at the 87 largest public plans, and 72% of them had return rates somewhere between 7 and 8%. And there were various degrees of expertise used in compiling that data. So with that introduction, Gina?
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for your question. The actual net return over the last 20 years for the state is 7.6%. So over a long period of time, that is what the state has earned. Having said that, my own view is it's pretty dangerous. I'm sorry? Inflation adjusted, real net return. So I think, having said that, I don't think it's a good idea to look backwards when we're thinking about returns, because the world's changed. In fact, that's what this whole discussion is about. The fellow before said, look, the world's changed. And I think the investment world has changed too. And it's not what we tried to do in this report. It was a professionally completed report by the state's investment advisors, and they looked forward. They looked at, given our asset allocation, what could we expect to make in the next, in the years looking ahead. And while I think reasonable people could disagree and argue, is that precisely the right number? Yes. I can't tell you I'm necessarily making that with my own portfolio. But I do think it's important that we recognize it was a 75 basis point reduction. It's one of the bigger reductions that a state has ever taken, and it is a step in the right direction. Are we done? Maybe not. Do we need to reevaluate it annually to take into account the global picture, the state of our economy, what inflation is doing? Yes. Whenever we live through a time where you make nothing for putting your money in the bank, it's tough to invest today, and I think we need to constantly evaluate it. But I do think we ought to look at the positive when we can, and the fact that we've taken this step, and I believe we'll continue to take steps in the right direction, is something that we should pause and say, it's a good thing, now let's keep going. Let's keep going to get this where we need it to go.
This will be the last question, and we're out of time. Yes, sir.
Thank you. When the feds go into Walmart to see what's selling, they do that because they want to get a gauge as to where the economy is at and where they think it's going to go. So when the state legislature looks and sees the amount of people applying for right care and food stamps, they really can't have their head in the sand to see really which way the state is going, because it's right there, right in front of them. So with that being said, being on the governor's board for workforce solutions, when I see the tens of millions of dollars being spent on grants to try and get people to work, where you got a company like CVS will get 50% of their payroll reimbursed for the first 6 months if they sign on to this program. A billion-dollar corporation does not need to get 50% of the payroll reimbursed. This is where a lot of the money is going. And right now there are grants out there that this money could be better spent and put into the pension system instead of being used for entitlement programs and whatnot. Because when you look at how the General Assembly has used our money as a piggy bank, there was a company in North Kingstown that hired 5 people with no strings attached, full payroll paid for the first 6 months, and then they laid off all 5 people. This is where some of this money that should be going into the pension system is going. And this is the question now. When you look at the Social Security system, and everybody gets those papers every single quarter, and you read the paper and it says, if you retire at such and such an age, you will receive X amount of dollars. If you forestall your retirement to a later age, you will get X amount of dollars per year. Now, the federal government has already set up the system. They've got the best lawyers, all right, that money can buy. I can't see why the state system can't be set up the same way, where people are not allowed to get their pensions till they turn 66 years old. Because you even said it, Mayor Fung, that there are more people now that are going to be collecting a pension than people paying in.
What's the question, please?
The question is, do you see the legality, is it feasible to change the pension system where folks are not allowed to collect their pensions like piggybacking the Social Security system. That, to me, would eliminate a real big problem.
That's actually, Mike, that's one of the things that you're absolutely right that I'm pushing for. If you read the article yesterday, there has to be a minimum age of retirement before you receive the benefits. And in fact, we've got a bill pending in the legislature that deals with that for both municipal and, police and fire. So there has to be some, and that's one of the reforms we're advocating for.
Well, on behalf of the University of Rhode Island College of Business, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight, and I want to thank all of our panelists. Please join me in a round of applause. And I know I can give gifts to at least 2 of the panelists, and I hope I can give them to all 4. I'm not sure of the state laws here. I don't think they're very expensive, so